Hello and welcome to One-on-One. I'm Brendan Ramasar, and today we continue our conversation with Professor Nicolelis, who's of course Duke School of Medicine professor in neuroscience. Welcome back from having gone nowhere, Professor. I have to tell you, this has been a fascinating discussion so far, and I want to thank you so much for being here and for allowing the viewers to sort of learn about fields that they may not have known about the future and what it might mean. I also thank Christian Francois, who organized this from Nihers, who's in the studio, so thanks, Christian, over on the side there. We were talking in the break, and I was saying, to me, while all science is sexy, there are some aspects of science that are sexier than others because they sort of capture your imagination of everybody. And quantum physics was that way, space science is always that way. But neuroscience really fits into that mold as well, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and particularly now, because with the tools that we are acquiring to study the brain, both in animals and in humans, we are basically touching on fundamental questions that we all want answers for, you know. Why do we think the way we think? Why the universe is the way we see? Why our human nature manifests itself in the way we all know? Where does all come from? And it comes from our brains. Our entire existence and our history, everything we do is generated by the brain. So
the same brain that told us to go into outer space to try and find our purpose in the universe and to understand the universe, we're now trying to understand that very brain that came up with that curiosity.
My thesis advisor got us to get to his lab by saying the brain is the only thing in this universe that studies itself. And just that, was so fascinating. And I remember his first lecture to me that I actually describe in my book. I got into his neuroscience course, and the first thing he had was the Big Bang. And these stars, these planets, and all of a sudden, boom, a brain shows up. And he looked at me and said, you know what? I was the only guy in the class at that point because the other students have not arrived yet. And he said, well, this is the only thing that explains what is out there. As far as we know, the only story that exists about the universe is the one that comes from our brains. So the universe is centered on us. But after that, I said, okay, I'm going to join this lab, and I never quit. I was 22, so that was when I got into this.
And that's a very human trait. I mean, you're a professor, so you teach people, but you're also fascinated by the field yourself. And to me, that's such a human thing, which is curiosity.
Absolutely.
It defines everything we do as a species, doesn't it?
Which, by the way, cannot be translated into binary code. There's no curious computer.
Right.
Yeah, there's no curious computer out there.
So in terms of the future and where your research fits in, I mean, obviously, because as we touched on Hollywood movies and your sort of mixture of fascination and disdain for what they show. But quite often the future, the science you're working on is involved in sort of military applications. Is that something that you're conscious of? Because I know you're sort of
absolutely, yeah.
a socially aware person.
Yes, no.
And what you're doing can be hijacked fairly easily.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I don't want to, in my lab, will never work on any military application because simply I don't see a future for it. And for my own view of the world and my own view of this technology. I do see a future for using this technology with non-invasive techniques to augment our capabilities as humans. I would love to be able to sit in my office while an avatar of myself is walking on Mars, and I can feel what it is to be on the surface of Mars. I can feel the sensation of rubbing my feet on that red sand, and almost experience the belief that I'm there. Now, I see this in the future, and in that sense, I actually read a lot of science fiction. I love science fiction, the good one. The science fiction that is not. They're not. Unfortunately, science fiction, to some degree, has gone into a dark age in the last 20 years or so. It's very science is portrayed as evil. Mad scientists are trying to conquer the world. Most of the time, that's what you hear or read or see in movies. I'm from a generation of science fiction was all about hope, was all about a brave new adventure of knowing civilizations that are out there somewhere in the universe, or discovering technologies to allow us to investigate our own sense of being. So science fiction was very rich with Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke, when I was growing up.
It's interesting because, I mean, as you mentioned in the break as well, people have to share it with people because only I heard it, and Christiane, of course, is the fact that you were inspired to some extent by science fiction.
Oh, absolutely. The first reference that I remember as a kid to the brain in my life was a book by Isaac Asimov called The Brain. which I read many years later, a few years ago. And now for me, that book is kind of boring. But when I read it, I was 13 or 12. That was unbelievable. But that guy was a science fiction writer telling hard facts about the anatomy and what we knew. There was very little in the 60s about the function of the brain. And that got me. And combined with the landing on the moon, 20th of July 1969, I'll never forget.
Not that you remember the date or anything.
No, never forget, because that's also the day of birth of Santos Dumont.
I remember watching it. Actually, we're the same age. So
yes, right. Yes. I was in the little country. I was in the countryside of Brazil. Imagine that. In a tiny little black and white TV. My great-grandmother was telling me that there was all a Hollywood trick. I should pay attention to that because it was not real. I knew that was real.
The eagle had landed.
Yeah. Yes, and because my grandmother, the mother of my mother, which was a very intellectual woman and very ahead of her generation, she loved astronomy. And she got me a map of the moon. And for weeks, we were plotting where the Apollo 11 was going to land. And so I knew all about the Sea of Tranquility and the exact spot where Neil Armstrong was about to land. So when I saw that guy stepping on the moon, and I tell my students in the United States that haven't forgotten, haven't never heard about it, that changed my brain. I was 8 years old, and I said, that's what I want to do.
You just chose a different final frontier. You chose the brain.
Yes, and that's what we needed, in my opinion. And that's the reason this meeting of the Caribbean Young Society here, Young Scientist Society, is so important, because what, in my opinion, our kids are missing is just someone to come and tell them, this is what life is about.
I find it interesting because, as I mentioned, we're the same age, and I see a lot of young people. I tend to meet a lot of young people, as we all do, but they take things for granted. They don't have that level of curiosity. They have a device. They don't wonder how that device came about, or how that device operates, or what makes it function the way it is, which are those human traits that have led us to where we are now and created the technology that we have now.
Yeah, I try. When I go to Brazil primarily to visit our institute there, and to go to São Paulo, where I grew up, very upscale, rich city, I tell the kids there, when I go to high schools, because I go a lot to schools to talk to children, and I say, look, do you know where this iPhone came from? This guy said, of course, I bought it in the store. I said, no. But before the store, where was it? And then I tried to backtrack every step with the iPhone, and when they realized there were decades of scientific work behind the concept and the possibility of building that thing that materialized into the iPhone or the iPad or any other part. Right. I don't work for Apple, so any other part of technology, they get almost stunned because they don't realize what it took for that thing to work.
It's the same notion that you mentioned before about the fact that people will see a sci-fi movie and think what you're doing is no big deal because they already saw it in film.
Right. And then you said, I had that in Brazil, and a journalist said the same thing to me, and I said, there's only one major difference. And the guy said, what is the difference? It looked identical. I said, no, there's a difference. Ours is real. It's for real. It's for true. We didn't put in a computer and program that thing to move on the screen. We had to get a human being to train for 4 months to imagine a movement. That imagination had to be translated into digital language, made a device move in an open field and get a feedback to him so his brain could tell him how it is to kick a ball even though you cannot move your body below your chest. Then the guy looked at me and said, okay, it's different.
Well, I guess that's also a field you would work in as well, the difference between reality and virtual reality and what we perceive as reality, which isn't reality.
That's a very good point, because nowadays, that border that in our generation was so clear is becoming very tenuous, and in some cases is blurred to the point where we don't know what is real and what is virtual. And we neuroscientists are using some of these techniques to help rehabilitate patients. Because when I told you that our patients felt that they kicked the ball, it's because we're inducing an illusion. It's called phantom limb illusion, that we probably have found a way to induce now, that gives the patient, or the brain of the patient, the sensation, the sensation that he has walked, really, and he's kicking the ball again. In reality, his brain is creating the sensation or illusion, but it works on our benefit.
So you're piggybacking onto something which is a phenomenon, which is when somebody loses a limb, their brain is still interpreting that limb as being attached.
Yeah, that's the famous phantom limb.
And you get phantom pain and things
absolutely,
like that.
Yeah, 90% of people who loses a limb experiences the sensation of phantom limb, for instance, or normal sensation or pain. So they feel pain in a part of the body that doesn't exist anymore. Imagine that.
Why would the brain do that? I mean, if it's obviously it's sending a signal, realizing it's getting no feedback. Why is it creating feedback?
Yeah, that is, probably is this mismatch that generates the phantom limb sensation. But the brain has acquired over years a model of what the body should be, and it's a very consistent model since we were born. Mm-hmm. And it takes some time for the brain to cope with the fact that that piece of the body is gone. So the illusion is almost like the brain saying, well, it should be there. You should be feeling that. And the fact that it's so prevalent, 90% of amputees have some sort of phantom limb sensation, tells you that this is a very fundamental principle of the brain. The brain wants you to feel what is supposed to be your body. And if you lose a piece of it...
So the brain is probably thinking at first, there's a system failure here.
Yes.
I'm not getting the signal back, but it has to be there.
Our hypothesis right now is a mismatch. The brain has an internal image of the body, but that internal image does not match what the periphery of the body is sending to the brain, and that collusion generates the illusion. You know?
And in time, the brain will finally figure out.
And in time, that thing can go. But in some people, a small fraction, that can last a whole life. And in some other patients, other behaviors trigger the phantom, triggers the sensation of the phantom. And what we discover, perhaps, I think I'm almost confident now that we did, is a way to trigger the phantom in the moment that is more useful for us in terms of rehabilitation. So we trigger the phantom when the patient is walking on the exo, so he has the satisfaction and this pleasure and the safety that he's doing the walking by himself.
I love the fact you're a true scientist. You said you're almost confident because you even question your own work because you think, I have to keep proving and proving.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You never...
Well, testing and testing to see.
You keep testing. This is a working hypothesis, but we have 8 patients. The results are very reproducible in all these 8, but it's only 8. We need to have a larger sample and in different types of pathologies, different types of lesions. But we posted these movies of our patients reporting what they felt on our Facebook page of the Walk Again project in Brazil during the World Cup, which, as you know, is a big deal down there.
The world's most viewed event as well. Yeah.
26 million people.
26
million people from Brazil clicked on those movies, 4 little clips.
We're giving Justin Bieber a run for his money there.
No, yes.
But it says something about the Brazilian people that they're that fascinated by science.
Yes, what was very important, I think I was more proud of that than anything of the World Cup. I was proud, of course, that Brazil did such a great job in organizing everything. I was not proud about the quality of our team football, but what I was proud is that on the months before the World Cup, as people realized that we are going for this, and it was news all over the country, and we got emails from all over the country talking about this, people were talking about science before and during the World Cup. They were meeting. I was in restaurants in São Paulo at the end of the night when we leave the lab, because we were basically living inside this lab for 3-4 months. People would come to us in the restaurant, the waiters, people having dinner, and say, so how is the robot doing? Is it going to happen? And they want to ask, they didn't want to talk about football, to talk about neuroscience.
So to make a nation proud of science is quite an accomplishment.
It was great. It was a great feeling. Even the day I was leaving Brazil to come back to the United States, now at the end of July, I was in the airport reading a book, and this kid came to me and said, I love that robot. So what can you say? That was.
So you're sort of a scientist celebrity in Brazil, then, or you?
No, I'm not a celebrity. But what I'm trying to convey the message is that in a country that is not known, that is not known for science worldwide, even though it has produced great scientists in the past and has great scientists now, in a very short period of time, you could galvanize the attention and you could get people to feel passionate about it, just with a very simple gesture.
But also you're working in that field in Brazil and in other areas as well. You have an institute there, which is trying also to foster that love of science.
Oh, absolutely, yes. 10 years ago, when I went back to Brazil for the first time, after a long time, since '89 I was living in the United States. 2004 I went back and I met with President Lula, and I said, look, we'd like to create a complete new model of science here. I want to go to a place no scientist would go, in the northeast, in the most underdeveloped part of the country, close to the desert of Brazil, in the outskirts of this town. And I'd like to create an institute that promotes science as an agent of social transformation, meaning science as this lever for higher education, for higher standards of community involvement, And we want to do this in two ways. We want first to create a clinic for women, so we provide the best possible prenatal care for the mothers of our future students. And then we want to create a school that goes from birth all the way to high school, in which half of the day, as kids mature, they get the regular Brazilian curriculum, but the other half, they get to play as scientists in laboratories, in these really modern laboratories for science education for kids. They don't have a single theoretical lecture. They learn science as I do science, by putting my hands on a lab and doing stuff. And we started with 10 years old as a pilot study with 1,500 kids in 2007. These kids come from the worst school district in the country, worst, bottom down. They're now competing for the best spots in the universities 7 years later all over the country.
Wow.
Because we got them to love the art of learning. You know, we got them to love science, not because we imposed that, but because we transformed them in protagonists of their own education. Their voices can be heard now. And this transformed the whole place. And when President Lula, several years later, met with one of the students that was giving him a gift from the school, he said, he asked this little girl, you know, this tall, how do you like this school? And he said, what school? He said, no, the school that we are here. He said, no. School is what I go in the morning, the public school. Here is my amusement park. Here's where I have fun.
If you love what you do, it's never work.
Exactly. And the president, you could see, you know, because he's from that part of the country, he knows how tough that place, growing up in that place was 30, 40 years ago. He saw, in my opinion, he saw in that girl the future. He saw the future of Brazil, because you're not imposing standards of education, tests and metrics. You are letting kids know how much fun is to challenge yourself to find your own limit intellectually and to discover the language nature, you know?
And to unleash the power of their brains in doing so.
Exactly.
But it's interesting that both the institute, the concept of the institute itself, and you as a person, quite often there's a separation between what scientists do and social change. It's almost like a barrier that's put up there. Scientists are supposed to just do what they're supposed to do and not worry about the repercussions or the larger effect it may have. There are a few examples over time, Oppenheimer and his regrets over the atomic bomb, of course. Is it important that science engage itself in society?
Oh, I think there's no other option anymore. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm a basic scientist. I love to be in my little lab or my office reading books or papers and doing experiments and thinking about these abstract issues that 99% of humanity would not care at all. But I think that all over the world, as we know, most of the funding for research comes from the taxpayers. It comes from society. Society needs to understand what it's paying for. It needs to understand the benefits, not only the economic benefits that we all know are very important, but what science can do for humanity on other domains. And at that sense, at that moment, it's not that every scientist has to work on applied questions. That doesn't exist. You need to have really a pool of bright, brilliant scientists working on abstract questions, and someone else will come and say, okay, I saw what you're doing, but this has an application. You need to have these guys here, and you need to support them on a very high level. I will defend that to my last days. However, what they're accomplishing and what that can, you know, what can come from that has to be disseminated to society. People need to understand. So my advisor used to say, and I took that for my entire life, you know, if you are working, it doesn't matter where you work in science, if you cannot go to an auditorium and explain to a layperson what is that you're doing, you're not doing it right. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to do that, you know, from quantum physics to neuroscience. And that's what our institute is about, is to bring to Brazilians the notion that science is part of our fabric as human beings. It's just like art, you know.
On the other side of that, should scientists be concerned about the ethics of what they're doing? Sometimes?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you hear discussions around stem cell research, for example, in the Manhattan Project as well. There are repercussions that science can have on society and the world. Sure,
absolutely. We are part of society. We are not detached from society. I think of course, it's not up to me to decide what can be done or not. I mean, I have to be part of that debate. I have to be part of that discussion. You mentioned what is the limit of brain-machine interfaces, this field that we created.
I mean, if you create the seminal work, and let's say some five-star general says, that sounds interesting, instead of Mars and experiencing it, let's do it in the battlefield.
Yeah,
and then you see your work co-opted.
Certainly it's not for me, but that's a debate that needs to be having. Society has to have that kind of debate. Stem cells, there are many issues. There are many. What we should remember, though, is that science is part of us as it had never been before. Just look around. Developing new ways to create safe foods, preserve the environment, global warming, biomedical research, biotechnology. You look at all these fields, and what you see is the future of humanity at stake. These areas are deciding how our future is going to be. And both sides of the table need to talk about it, society and scientists. So we are members of society. We are a part of it.
And to some extent, I mean, evolution has made every human being, to some extent, a scientist as well.
Oh, I say that all the time.
We're constantly analyzing our environment and understanding.
I actually said that this morning, that we are all scientists. When we're preparing coffee, when we're cooking at home, when we are doing some little thing for our daily routine. In fact, the best story I have from the Natal Institute, after several years of the science education program, where we use laboratories to teach these guys about electricity, magnetism, and everything in practical terms. A member of the fire department of the city came to talk to me and said, "You know what? I need to thank you. No, your teachers and everybody." I said, well, "Why?" "Well, you put your schools next to these very poor neighborhoods where you have some slums that very, had bad fires in the past, favelas, electrical fires. You know what? Your kids are teaching the neighbors, their families everywhere, how to do these connections properly. So there are no electrical fires anymore. So we don't need to come here and put these fires down, because now they know Ohm's law, and they know how to make the gambiarras, we call in Portuguese, the illegal connections. They get this thing, they get electricity to the house, but the correct way, so people don't die anymore.
So people don't get burned to death as a result of fires.
Exactly.
We have about 3 minutes left, and we've been talking a lot about the science that you're doing and science fiction and the nexus and the blurring that you're sort of creating by the work that you're doing. And we both obviously love Arthur C. Clarke. I thought the last few minutes, let's talk about the HAL 9000,
yes.
2001. It's an interesting sort of parable for the work that you're doing, because even though HAL is I guess a villain.
A villain.
Basically in the
He becomes a
book,
villain, yeah.
And in the film.
He becomes a villain.
He's still outsmarted by the humans.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, because of our brains.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I went to watch that movie for the first time in Brazil, my whole family went. My father, my sister, my mother, they always slept in the first 10 minutes of the movie, and I was there watching that thing. And the scene of the, whatever is, a hominid throws a bone on the space, and you see a spaceship, is exactly what you're talking about. It was that hominid's brain that eventually built that spaceship and that computer, not the other way around. That other way around, in my humble opinion, will never happen.
Because our brain is immensely more complex
immensely
than any computer.
More complex, and it uses
well, it's a
logic.
paradox. For it to be smarter than us, we could invent it then, couldn't we?
Yeah, so there's something that you probably heard about that is very popular now, called the singularity. This author in the United States proposed that there is a moment that is coming very soon which machines are going to outsmart us. I actually wrote something saying that that's completely nonsense. That moment, if you talk about Turing machines, the computers that we know right now, will never happen. That will never happen. So we are safe. We can relax. At least in that domain, we can relax.
Because even in the Hollywood film, where a computer becomes self-aware and therefore can program itself,
yes,
it would only be able to program itself within the limitations of what it was originally programmed.
The limitations of the binary logic that the computers use. Yeah, and Turing himself knew that.
Alan
Turing has a very famous paper where he actually says that to solve some problems with his Turing machine, that is the computer we have today, he had to create something called an oracle machine that would basically solve these unsolvable issues. And he concluded that oracle could not be another Turing machine. It had to be basically a human.
And in fact, no machine has yet passed the Turing test.
No matter how many times you see that announced in the press, that hasn't happened yet.
So what's next for you? Just keep working in your field and trying to streamline this robotics
I'm
work?
still so far paid to continue to be a child, so I'm going to continue to pursue my curiosity And I have a great group of students in the United States at Duke, and another good group, phenomenal group in Brazil. And they keep challenging me to come up with new ideas, and that's what I love about this.
All I can say is you have some very lucky students and colleagues. Professor Nicolelis, it's been a great pleasure and honor having you on the program. I want to thank you so much for being here.
It was a great pleasure.
Thank
you for the invitation.
Thank you. You've been watching One-on-One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.